Well, this week marks 1 year since the start of the violence that we saw in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng in 2021. I'm sure you'll never forget what we saw last year. There were the attacks on trucks, the looting of stores, the violence between communities. It was sparked, it seems, by the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma. Meanwhile, in the US, that country is now focusing on the violence they saw as former President Donald Trump was leaving office. His supporters attacked the Capitol. They went into the Senate building. There were people armed with guns there. Samson Mulugeta is a former Africa Bureau chief for New York Newsday. Joins us now. Samson, good afternoon to you. It's so interesting to compare these incidents. We saw violence at the incarceration of a former president here. In the US, there was violence in support of a president as he was leaving power. They both appear to show a strong sort of sense of personal loyalty, a sense that this particular person is important to the people who commit the violence.
Absolutely. You know, after all, millions upon millions of people support these leaders. In the case of Trump, up to 72 million people voted for him, although Biden got above 80 million votes. So there's a lot of support. And the question then becomes, as the January 6th committee in Washington, D.C. meticulously builds a case against Donald Trump, it appears that people are starting to think, what happens if Donald Trump is indicted on criminal charges of some sort, and even there's a possibility of, jailing him or indicting him or preventing him from running again? What happens with his supporters? So that scary thought is now beginning to rise in the minds of people who are watching the January 6th committee build a case, a very compelling case, with testimony from Republicans who are saying that Trump knew about what's going to happen and encouraged it, incited it, and therefore must be held accountable. And my thought, as someone who's lived in South Africa for over a decade and now is in Washington, D.C. watching this, I flash back to this time last year when, as you know, all hell broke loose after Zuma was arrested literally just before an hour before deadline. And the country went into this scary spiral of violence and looting that cost over nearly, I think the estimate is from $1 to $2 billion in damages, over 300 people dead, and we all experienced it. You remember that. And so there are comparison between arresting a former leader in South Africa and the United States. It's never happened in the U.S. history. It's obviously never happened in the history of South Africa. And but you know, as Mr. Zuma was calling the bluff of the judicial system in South Africa, whether they're going to come and, that's a game of chicken. And they said, okay, no, since this is the contempt of court, you will not come to court to present your case. The highest court in the land said he must serve jail time. And that happened. And so the link, now we can, Stephen, you and I can talk about the differences and similarities between the U.S. and South Africa. South Africa is a very new democracy, about 30 years old, and America is longer, but it has faced an unprecedented amount of instability right now. So that's where we stand. There's a certain similarity. I mean, for anyone who knows South Africa and America, it's a sense of sort of deja vu, because South Africa does look a lot like America. It's a mini version of America. And so even in politics, there are some similarities for people who know both countries.
There's another thing around it, around what both leaders did, and let me just be sort of think my way through this quite carefully. But on one level, it seems to me that Zuma was very defiant beforehand. He was almost inciting people. He was making comments about how he wouldn't go to jail, etc. Trump was even worse, from what we can see. We can see that Trump was, actively inciting violence. From what we see, the testimony to the January 6th committee, seemed to try and wanted to take over a presidential limousine to get to where his supporters were, told them to, was telling people to come with guns. The role that both of these leaders played themselves was quite important. It was also what they were saying. It wasn't just what was happening on the ground. It wasn't just the arguments we've seen around identity, particularly in the US. It was also what both of these leaders did. Trump more than Zuma, but both of them.
Yes. So it's quite interesting that they're very, very charismatic personalities. People will tell you that, as individuals, both these leaders have a very charming, very persuasive, very warm sort of personas, and so their followers are really passionate about that. But they have also skirted so close to breaking the law in so many ways. I mean, knowing what South Africa has to go through with President Zuma, former President Zuma, we all know all the trials and tribulations and the sacking by Mbeki and then the rape trial, and just like you couldn't make up a more dramatic drama in South African politics, and getting back into power and getting rid of Mbeki, and also the whole extraordinary rise of Donald Trump from, absolutely peripheral entertainment figure, apprentice, a reality show star who comes into the political field and nobody gives him a chance, and then he now says but he's got like a direct tap to the ego of the American, a certain part of the American public, and they will listen to him. And if he rouses the crowd and sets a fire, lights the fire that engulfs everything, it's a scary prospect. And that's why both in the Zuma case and the Trump case, the leaders have to weigh what are we willing to risk. The moment last year when KZN was aflame, when vigilantes were roaming the streets, and the country seems to be, at the precipice of a breakdown, it made you just very, very nervous for the fate of this beautiful country. So, and the same thing with the U.S. The U.S. has never faced such a gargantuan test to its democracy. This has been coming for a long time. The red and blue states are so far apart. Gun violence, they cannot come to an agreement to stop that. There was a shooting, as you know, at the 4th of July parade near Chicago in Highland Parks. And there's so many of these events, although it's a big country of 300 and plus million people, it's like almost like a continent. So something bad is always bound to happen. But at the same time, the litany of bad news, Roe versus Wade, has torn the country apart. So there's just a sense of tension, to put it mildly, going on, as opposed to, and similarly in South Africa is the most unequal society on earth, with Gini coefficients of, the highest. That measures the difference between the haves and the have-nots. And so it's just a lot of tension going on in South Africa, and people are looking to show their frustration.
And Samson, hanging over, I think, both of our democracies, the US and South Africa, is the sort of threat, could it happen again? No one ever thought that what happened in the United States would happen. It just, 10 years ago, if you'd said this was happening, it would look like very bad science fiction. In some ways it was. The point I'm trying to make is that, here in South Africa, we do talk about, will this happen again? I think people see Trump running again, possibly. That's hanging over both countries. And also proper accountability is the other issue. We haven't seen this in South Africa. I don't know if we're going to see it in the US either. Maybe we will, but maybe we won't.
Yes. Both countries are faced with really bad choices. In the case of South Africa, the people in charge are, still pretty much the same. Ramaphosa was vice president under Zuma, and now he's in charge. And so the challenge of the ruling party in South Africa is there is really no strong alternative that could challenge the ANC. So this it's people who are part of the problem being asked to solve the problem of the country. So there is this sort of like being frozen in, and it is the action, how to fix this is happening in South Africa right now. And in the U.S., the Democrats are not as willing to go to the brink as the Republicans are, and the Republicans are more very disciplined, and they have planned and pushed the envelope as far as it could go to create a situation where there's there's majoritarian rule, but right now the U.S. is in a space of where the minority are ruling or dictating the status quo. So that's creating a tension because most people in America support gun control, some sort of gun rules for the road for guns, and they support women's right to choose how to control her body, but a determined minority is dictating what should happen. So that tension is building. And getting back to the actual possible indictment, the January 6th committee is having another hearing, and they're like a prosecutor building brick by brick a case against Donald Trump. And if there's no action on that, then it's a question of is the president like a king? He cannot do no wrong. It's like Nixon said, if the president does it, it's legal. It cannot be illegal. So he came out and said that a long time ago. But even the famous Richard Nixon did not push the envelope as much as Donald Trump has done in America and Jacob Zuma has done in South Africa.
Samson Mulugeta, I'm so sorry, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you. The former Africa Bureau Chief for New York Newsday. I really appreciate the time.